The first time my father called me a fraud in front of strangers, I thought my heart would stop. Picture this: a freezing Virginia courtroom, the smell of old wood polish choking the air, and my own blood pointing his finger straight at my face. That woman is not my daughter. His voice cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Even the court reporter froze mid-sentence. What would you do if the person who raised you tried to erase your entire existence? Not just your inheritance, not just your reputation. Your very identity as their child. This isn't a movie. This isn't some legal drama you watch late at night. This happened to me. And by the time you hear how it ended, I promise you'll understand something important about family, about survival, and about the secrets some people will destroy everything to protect. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how my father took me to court, claimed I was never his daughter, and walked into a truth he never saw coming. Let me take you back to that moment. The courtroom was packed with strangers whose eyes felt like needles. I remember the sharp sting of winter air still trapped in my wool coat, the way my boots felt heavy against the cold floor, the sour smell of burnt courthouse coffee mixing with lemon polish on the wood benches. Then my attorney slid something across the table, a sealed envelope, dark blue wax, Pentagon insignia stamped in gold. The judge opened it slowly. Like he already knew something important was hiding inside. He read one line, then another. His expression changed completely. Not dramatically, judges don't do dramatic, but something shifted behind his eyes. He removed his glasses carefully, folded them, and spoke in a voice so quiet it became terrifying. Everyone in this courtroom will stand up right now. Chairs scraped backward. Murmurs spread like fire through dry grass. And my father's face, it lost every drop of color. For the first time in my entire life, I watched that man become afraid of me. I was born in a town where men like my father were treated like monuments. Cedar Hollow, Virginia. Population small enough that everyone knew your business but pretended they didn't. Not large enough for secrets to stay buried, but just small enough for pride to live forever. My father, Thomas Bennett, had spent 23 years as a military police officer. He retired with a ruined knee and a personality sharp enough to cut through steel. People respected him because he spoke like a man who'd survived something important. Maybe he had, but by the time I came along, whatever softness he once possessed had already dried up, especially toward women. "Girls need stability," he used to say, standing in the yard while my older brother Jake threw footballs through the autumn air. "Men need purpose." I was 8 years old the first time I understood I would never be enough for him. Jake crashed Dad's truck into a mailbox when he was 16. Dad laughed about it for years, told the story at dinner parties, shook his head with this amused smile like his son had done something adorable. I got a B+ in chemistry once. Dad didn't speak to me for 3 days. My mother, Alina, tried to balance the house the way people hold together cracked glass with trembling fingers. She was warm where he was cold, gentle where he was rigid. She used to sneak into my room late at night and brush my hair behind my ear while I pretended to sleep. "You don't have to become hard to survive him," she whispered once. I didn't understand what she meant back then. I do now. By 17, I had already decided I was leaving Cedar Hollow. Not for college, not for marriage, for the military. The day the acceptance letter from the United States Military Academy arrived, my hands shook so badly I could barely open the envelope. My mother cried before I even finished reading. "Oh my God," she whispered, covering her mouth. "Claire," but my father barely looked up from his dinner. "You'll wash out in 6 months." The room went silent. My mother stared at him. "Tom, no," he interrupted calmly, cutting into his steak. "She's stubborn, not strong. There's a difference." I remember sitting there in that tiny dining room with yellow wallpaper peeling near the ceiling, trying not to let him see how badly his words hurt me. Outside the window, summer rain tapped softly against the glass. Jake smirked into his mashed potatoes. Somehow, that hurt even more. At West Point, I learned quickly that pain could become fuel if you let it. I learned how to run until my lungs burned raw, how to function on 4 hours of sleep, how to keep moving while men twice my size waited for me to fail. Some of them wanted me gone before I even opened my mouth. But here's the strange thing that happens when you spend enough time underestimated. You stop fearing people. During training exercises in the mountains, I watched grown men collapse from exhaustion while I kept climbing. Not because I was stronger, because I'd spent my entire childhood learning how to survive emotional cold. Physical pain felt simpler, cleaner. When I graduated, my mother drove 9 hours just to see me receive my commission. My father never came. He claimed he had better things to do. Years later, I would learn he spent that weekend drinking with friends at a fishing cabin. I served. Germany first, then Kuwait, then assignments nobody in my family fully understood because I wasn't allowed to explain them. I missed birthdays, holidays, funerals, relationships that could have become marriages. Meanwhile, Jake drifted from one disaster to another. Failed business, DUI, gambling, debt. Every time he crashed, my father caught him before he hit the ground. "That's my son," Dad always said, as if those 3 words explained everything. The older I became, the more my father seemed to resent me. Not openly at first, quietly. Like a man bothered by something he couldn't control. He hated when people thanked me for my service. Hated when neighbors asked about my promotions. Once during Christmas dinner, a family friend congratulated me on making major. My father snorted into his whiskey. "Military is different now," he muttered. "Half of it's politics." The table went dead silent. My mother looked exhausted. That was the year I realized she'd spent most of her marriage apologizing for a man who never apologized for himself. Then she got sick. Pancreatic cancer. Fast, merciless. The kind that steals people in pieces while everyone pretends hope still exists. I took leave and stayed beside her hospital bed for nearly 6 weeks. At night, machines hummed softly in the dark while snow fell outside the windows. Sometimes she slept. Sometimes she held my hand without speaking. My father rarely stayed longer than 20 minutes. One evening after she fell asleep, he stood near the doorway staring at me. "You always needed attention," he said flatly. I looked at him in disbelief. "She's dying, and somehow you still make it about yourself." That was the closest I ever came to hitting him, but my mother opened her eyes before I could respond. She looked terrified, not of me, of what we'd become. She died 2 days later with my hand in hers. At the funeral, people told me she'd been proud of me, that she talked about me constantly, that she kept photos of me in uniform beside her bed. My father barely looked at me the entire day. After the burial, while distant relatives carried casseroles into the church basement, he finally approached me near the cemetery gates. Cold wind moved through the dead grass between us. "You stopped being my daughter," he said quietly, "the moment you chose that uniform over this family." I stared at him for several seconds, certain I must have heard wrong. Then he walked away, just like that. 3 weeks later, I received the court summons. I was standing in my kitchen in Arlington when I opened it. Rain hammered against the windows while my coffee grew cold beside the sink. I read the first page once, then twice, then a third time because my brain refused to accept the words. Thomas Bennett was suing me for my mother's house, her savings, nearly every asset she'd left behind. But it was the final sentence that hollowed out my chest. Claim filed under disputed paternity. According to my father, I wasn't his daughter at all. I didn't sleep that night. I sat alone in my kitchen while rain slid down the windows in silver streaks. The papers spread across the table like evidence from someone else's life. Every few minutes, I reread the same sentence, hoping it would somehow rearrange itself into something less cruel. Disputed paternity. My father wasn't just trying to take my mother's estate. He was trying to erase me from the family completely. Around 3 a.m, I finally called Jake. I don't know why. Maybe some foolish part of me still believed blood meant something. He answered on the 4th ring, sounding irritated. "What? You knew about this?" Silence, then a sigh. "Dad's doing what he has to do." I gripped the edge of the counter. "He's claiming Mom cheated on him." "So?" The word hit me harder than shouting would have. "So?" I repeated. "Claire, come on, everybody knows you were always her favorite. Dad's sick of it. He deserves the house." I laughed once, short, disbelieving. "The house Mom paid for." "You were never around." His voice snapped suddenly. "You don't know what things were like after I left, as if joining the military had been abandonment instead of survival. You gambled away your own money," I said quietly. "Now you want hers too." His breathing changed. That told me everything. He hung up. I stood there listening to the dial tone for several seconds before lowering the phone slowly. Outside, thunder rolled across the Virginia sky. For the first time in years, I cried for my mother instead of missing her. The lawsuit spread through Cedar Hollow faster than wildfire through dry grass. By the end of the week, former neighbors had already chosen sides. Some called quietly to offer sympathy. Others avoided me entirely. Then the local paper published the story. Decorated female officer accused in family fraud case. I stared at the article during lunch break inside the Pentagon cafeteria, unable to finish eating. Around me, conversations blended into meaningless noise. Trays clattered. Coffee machines hissed. Somewhere nearby, a television played muted news coverage. My phone buzzed constantly. Old classmates, distant cousins, reporters. One message simply read, "Is it true your real father was another soldier?" I deleted it immediately. But humiliation has a way of settling into the body physically. It changes how you walk into rooms, how long you hold eye contact. Even at work, I began noticing subtle shifts in people's behavior. Questions lingered longer. Conversations stopped when I entered elevators. No one directly accused me of lying about my service, but suspicion moves quietly before it speaks aloud. And because much of my record remained classified, I couldn't defend myself fully. That was the cruel brilliance of what my father had done. He understood just enough about military confidentiality to weaponize it. 3 days later, I drove back to Cedar Hollow to meet with an attorney recommended by an old colonel friend of mine. Her office sat above a hardware store on Main Street. The brass plaque outside the stairwell read Evelyn Brooks, attorney at law. Inside smelled like old books and peppermint tea. Evelyn herself looked to be somewhere in her late 60s, with silver hair pinned neatly behind her head and eyes sharp enough to cut through concrete. She didn't waste time with sympathy. "That man's dangerous," she said after reviewing the lawsuit. "He's my father." "No," she corrected me calmly. "He's your opposing counsel's client. Learn the difference quickly." I almost smiled. Almost. For 2 hours, she reviewed documents while I explained family history piece by piece. Occasionally, she'd pause to underline something or scribble notes into the margins. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "Your father's story has holes." "What kind of holes?" "The kind that make judges angry." She slid a document toward me, a photocopy of my birth certificate. "He filed a request challenging authenticity," she explained. "But county records show somebody already tried accessing and altering supporting files 6 months ago." I stared at her. "Altering? Your father isn't just grieving, Claire. He's preparing." A cold heaviness settled into my stomach. Evelyn removed her glasses slowly. "Tell me about your military record." There's not much I can discuss. I know. Her voice softened slightly. But if this reaches federal territory, surprises can destroy cases. I hesitated. For years, secrecy had become instinct. Some assignments remained classified. Even now, entire portions of my service record existed behind walls ordinary civilians would never see. I served overseas, I said carefully. That part I know. There were operations attached to diplomatic security. Her expression changed slightly. What kind of operations? The kind nobody acknowledges publicly. Silence stretched between us. Outside the office window, I could hear a train horn somewhere in the distance. Evelyn folded her hands together. Claire, is there anything protected under federal seal that could affect your identity or service verification? Immediately, a memory surfaced. A locked briefing room. A colonel sliding a sealed envelope across a metal table years ago. If your service record is ever challenged in civilian court, he had told me, this goes through legal counsel only. At the time, I'd almost laughed. Who would challenge it? Now I understood. I might have something, I said quietly. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Might. I was instructed never to open it unless absolutely necessary. Would this qualify as absolutely necessary? I thought about my father standing in court calling me a fraud, about my mother dying while he accused me of selfishness, about the headlines, the whispers, the humiliation. Yes, I answered. That evening, I drove to a secure storage facility outside Alexandria. The sky hung low and gray above the highway, heavy with incoming snow. Traffic lights reflected across wet pavement like broken ribbons of color. The storage locker itself was small. Metal walls, fluorescent lighting, cold enough to see my breath. At the very back sat an old military footlocker, covered in scratches from deployments overseas. For a moment, I simply stared at it. So many years of my life lived inside silence. I unlocked it carefully. Inside were photographs, commendations, old uniforms, and beneath them a flat black document case. My pulse quickened immediately. The seal was still intact. Dark blue wax embossed with the Department of Defense insignia. Across the front, stamped in red, authorized only by federal order. My fingers hovered over it without touching. Suddenly, the room felt much smaller. I remembered the night I received it, the colonel's expression, the warning in his voice. Some documents protect information, others protect people. I picked up the envelope slowly. And for the first time since the lawsuit began, I realized my father had absolutely no idea what he had started. The courthouse in Fairfax smelled like wet wool, burnt coffee, and old paper. By the time Evelyn and I arrived for the preliminary hearing, reporters had already gathered outside the entrance beneath a line of gray winter clouds. Camera shutters clicked the second I stepped out of the car. Major Bennett, is your military record fabricated? Did your mother hide your real father? Are federal investigators involved? Evelyn placed one steady hand against my elbow and guided me forward without slowing down. Eyes ahead, she murmured. Inside, the courthouse buzzed with quiet excitement. Small-town scandals rarely collided with military secrecy, and people could sense something ugly unfolding. I saw strangers whispering before I even reached the courtroom doors. Then I saw my father. Thomas Bennett stood near the front row in a dark suit that suddenly looked too large for him. Age had hardened him over the past few years. His shoulders seemed narrower now, but his eyes still carried the same cold certainty I remembered from childhood. Jake stood beside him, avoiding my gaze. For one brief second, I almost walked over there, not to argue, to beg. Some wounded part of me still wanted my father to look ashamed, to pull me aside and admit he'd gone too far, to tell everyone this had been a mistake born from grief. Instead, he looked at me the way people look at enemies before battle, like someone preparing to win. "You ready?" Evelyn asked quietly. "No, that's honest," she replied. Honest people survive cross-examination better. We entered the courtroom. The hearing itself began with procedural arguments, but underneath every legal phrase sat something deeply personal and poisonous. Opposing counsel painted me carefully, layer by layer, into someone unrecognizable. A manipulative daughter, a woman who abandoned her family, a military officer with suspiciously incomplete records. At one point, the attorney, a polished man named Richard Vance, held up copies of my service history. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "significant portions of Major Bennett's alleged military accomplishments cannot be independently verified." Alleged. The word echoed through the room. I felt heat crawl slowly up my neck. Evelyn remained calm beside me, occasionally making notes while Vance continued. "We are simply asking whether the defendant has exaggerated or falsified elements of her identity for financial gain." Financial gain. As though 20 years of military service had been some elaborate inheritance scam. The judge, Harold Whitmore, listened carefully without revealing much emotion. He was older, probably late 70s, with the kind of face that looked carved from stone. The only thing soft about him were his eyes, and even those looked tired. When court recessed for lunch, I escaped into the hallway near the vending machines, needing air that didn't feel poisoned by accusation. That's where my father found me. "You should settle," he said. I turned slowly. "What? You heard me." He spoke quietly, almost casually, as if discussing whether instead of dismantling my life, "Give Jake the house. Walk away clean." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're doing all this for money, for family? You accused Mom of cheating on you." His jaw tightened. "That woman poisoned this family against me for years." The way he said "that woman instead of your mother" made something inside me finally crack. "She loved you," I whispered. "No," he snapped. "She pitied me." For a moment, I saw it, not anger, humiliation. The deep, rotten kind men carry when they spend their lives fearing they were never respected in the first place. My father leaned closer. "You think those medals made you important?" he asked quietly. "You're still just a girl who ran away." I should have responded. Instead, I noticed his hands trembling, not from age, from desperation. And suddenly, I understood something terrifying. This lawsuit wasn't only about greed, it was about punishment. He needed to destroy me because my existence reminded him of everything he failed to become. Back inside the courtroom, Evelyn began dismantling pieces of the case methodically. She presented banking records showing Jake's debts, mortgage documents proving my mother paid for most of the family home herself, evidence that my father had attempted to access restricted county files months before filing suit. The judge's expression darkened gradually. Then Vance made a mistake. "We intend to call witnesses who can testify the defendant frequently exaggerated military accomplishments impossible to verify." Evelyn stood immediately. "Impossible for whom?" Vance hesitated. She walked slowly toward the evidence table. "Your Honor, opposing counsel continues implying absence of public records equals absence of service. Because there are no complete records available," Vance replied sharply. Evelyn turned toward him fully. "Because some records are protected." The room became still. Vance scoffed lightly. "Protected from a probate court?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked toward me. That look said one thing clearly. Now, my pulse began pounding hard enough to hurt. Slowly, I reached into my briefcase and removed the sealed black document case. The moment it touched the table, Evelyn's expression changed. Even she hadn't expected it to look so official. Several people leaned forward in the gallery. Vance frowned. "What exactly is that?" Evelyn ignored him. "Your Honor," she said carefully. "The defense requests permission to submit sealed federal documentation regarding Major Claire Bennett's protected service record." My father laughed under his breath. "Oh, this ought to be good." The judge extended his hand. Evelyn carried the envelope forward herself. When Judge Whitmore saw the Pentagon seal, his posture shifted immediately. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough for every person in that courtroom to feel it. He inspected the red authorization stamp for several long seconds before carefully breaking the seal. Paper crackled softly. The courtroom had become so quiet I could hear someone coughing in the hallway outside. Climax and resolution, the judge read the first page, then the second. His face changed completely, not confusion, recognition. He removed his glasses slowly and reread one paragraph again. My father shifted impatiently. "Your Honor," no response. Judge Whitmore continued reading. Vance finally stood. "Your Honor, if there's an issue with admissibility, sit down." The words came out sharper than anyone expected. Even Evelyn blinked. The judge looked directly at me then. Really looked at me for the first time since proceedings began. And suddenly, something in his expression resembled respect. My father frowned. "What the hell is this, Judge?" Whitmore folded the documents carefully. Then he placed both hands flat on the bench. "Mr. Bennett," he said quietly, "you will not speak again unless instructed." The room froze. My father actually laughed once in disbelief. "I'm sorry," the judge looked toward the bailiff. Then, in a voice that carried through every corner of that courtroom, he said, "Everyone in this courtroom will stand up immediately." Chairs scraped backward. Confused murmurs spread everywhere. Beside me, Evelyn exhaled slowly without speaking. Across the aisle, my father's face had gone completely pale, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized the truth was finally entering the room. Nobody moved at first, not completely. People hesitated halfway out of their chairs, exchanging confused glances, while the courtroom filled with the dry scrape of wood against tile. Even the reporters looked uncertain whether they were witnessing a legal procedure or the beginning of something far bigger. Judge Whitmore remained standing behind the bench, one hand resting on the sealed Pentagon documents. "Bailiff," he said calmly, "close the courtroom doors." The heavy doors shut with a deep metallic thud. My father looked around nervously. "What is this supposed to mean?" The judge ignored him. Then he looked directly at me. "Major Claire Bennett," he said carefully, "please remain standing." Something shifted in the room the moment he used my rank without hesitation. Not alleged, not claimed, recognized. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat. "The federal documentation submitted to this court confirms that portions of Major Bennett's service record are protected under national security classification, authorized by the Department of Defense." Whispers exploded instantly across the gallery. "Classified? Oh my God, what did he say?" The judge raised one hand, and silence slowly returned. These records further establish that Major Bennett served in multiple authorized operations attached to diplomatic recovery and defense coordination overseas. Vance stood abruptly. "Your Honor, I object to." "You object," Whitmore interrupted sharply. The old judge removed his glasses again, and this time there was anger in his eyes. "You brought a decorated military officer into civilian court and publicly accused her of fraud without understanding the nature of federal protection statutes." Vance's face drained of color. My father looked completely lost now. "What decorated officer? She worked some office job overseas." Judge Whitmore turned toward him slowly. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "your daughter received commendations this court does not even possess clearance to fully review." The silence afterward felt enormous. I could hear my own heartbeat. My father stared at me like he'd never seen me before, and maybe he hadn't. The judge continued reading portions deemed allowable for civilian disclosure. Most details remained vague, but the impact didn't require specifics. Diplomatic extraction support, personnel recovery coordination, direct operational distinction, federal commendation under sealed authorization. Every phrase landed heavier than the last. Jake looked physically sick. Meanwhile, I sat perfectly still because years of military conditioning had trained me to control emotion in public. But inside, memories were rising fast and violent. Sandstorms swallowing entire roads in Kuwait, the metallic smell of blood inside transport aircraft, a terrified embassy employee gripping my arm while gunfire echoed 3 streets away, faces of soldiers who never made it home. All the things I carried silently while my father told people I wasn't strong enough. Judge Whitmore finally lowered the papers. This court acknowledges Major Bennett's service as legitimate, verified, and federally protected. The words hit me harder than I expected, not because strangers believed me now, because my father was hearing them publicly, irrefutably. For the first time in my life, another man with authority was forcing him to confront reality, and he hated it. "This is ridiculous," my father snapped suddenly. "I don't care what medals she got, she's still not my daughter." Evelyn stood immediately. "Actually, Your Honor, we're prepared to address that lie next." She approached the bench carrying another folder. Thicker, older. This documentation was recovered through county archive subpoena requests, she explained. It concerns a legal filing made by Mr. Thomas Bennett 22 years ago. My father's entire body stiffened. I noticed it instantly. Evelyn opened the folder carefully. In 2004, Mr. Bennett privately filed documents attempting to surrender partial parental financial responsibility during a period of significant personal debt. The courtroom murmured again. Jake whispered, "Dad, shut up," my father hissed. Judge Whitmore reviewed the papers slowly. Then his expression darkened. "These records explicitly identify Claire Bennett as your biological child." My father's mouth opened slightly. No words came out. Evelyn continued with surgical calm. The plaintiff knowingly submitted false claims of disputed paternity to pursue estate seizure and property acquisition. The judge looked furious now. "Mr. Bennett," he said quietly, "did you knowingly provide fraudulent testimony to this court?" My father's confidence finally cracked. "You don't understand," he muttered. "Her mother—" "No," the judge interrupted sharply. "You don't understand the seriousness of what you've done." For a moment, nobody breathed. Then the courtroom doors opened again. 2 men entered wearing dark federal suits. No badges displayed openly, no expressions either, but every military instinct inside me recognized them immediately. Government. One approached the bench and handed paperwork to the bailiff. The second scanned the room briefly before his eyes landed on me. A tiny nod. Professional. Respectful. My father looked terrified now. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. Judge Whitmore reviewed the new documents carefully before speaking. "Due to the classified nature of evidence improperly challenged during these proceedings," he said, "federal review has been requested regarding potential violations connected to falsified filings and unauthorized attempts to access protected records." My father turned toward Vance in panic. "You said this was just probate court." Vance looked ready to faint, because suddenly this wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about federal misconduct. Jake stood halfway from his seat. "Dad, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," but his voice sounded thin now. Frightened, old, I watched him unravel in real time, and the strangest part, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, so unbelievably tired. Years of trying to earn love from a man incapable of giving it had exhausted something deep inside me long before this courtroom ever existed. Judge Whitmore finally turned toward me. "Major Bennett," he said more gently, "this court owes you an apology." I swallowed hard. "You don't owe me anything, Your Honor." "Yes," he replied quietly, "I believe we do." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke me, because respect from strangers should never feel more healing than love from family, but sometimes it does. My father suddenly pointed at me again, though now his hand visibly shook. "She turned everybody against me," he said weakly. "Eleanor always chose her over her own family." I stood slowly before Evelyn could stop me. The courtroom became still again. For years, I'd imagined confronting him, screaming, accusing, demanding answers for every wound he left behind. But when the moment finally arrived, I found myself strangely calm. "You know what the saddest part is?" I said quietly. My father stared at me. "You still think this is about winning?" His eyes flickered. "You spent your entire life trying to make me feel small enough for you to feel strong." My voice remained steady. "And even now, after everything, you still can't admit the truth." I took a breath. "Claire, you didn't lose your daughter today." The words landed softly, but they cut deeper than shouting ever could. "You lost her years ago." My father looked at me as though he'd been struck, and for the first time in my entire life, he had absolutely nothing left to say. The court dismissed proceedings just after 4 in the afternoon. By then, the reporters outside had multiplied. News vans lined the street beneath freezing rain, while courthouse staff rushed through side entrances trying to avoid cameras. Somebody had already leaked enough details for headlines to spread online. "Decorated officer cleared in shocking courtroom reversal." Federal documents dismantle fraud claims. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. Evelyn and I exited through a private hallway arranged by courthouse security. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead as we walked in silence. Finally, she stopped beside the elevator. "You did well in there." I gave a tired laugh. I felt like I was going to pass out. "That's called being human." The elevator doors opened. Before stepping inside, I looked at her carefully. "Why did you take my case?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "My husband served in Vietnam," she said. "Spent 40 years pretending certain memories didn't hurt him." Her eyes softened. "I recognize honorable people when I meet them." The doors closed between us before I could answer. Outside, the cold hit hard enough to sting my lungs. Rain mixed with sleet beneath the darkening Virginia sky while agents quietly escorted me toward my vehicle. One of them, tall, gray-haired, probably former military himself, paused before I entered the car. "You handled yourself professionally, Major." "Thank you." He hesitated briefly. "For what it's worth," he added, "people know what you did overseas, even if they can't say it publicly." Then he walked away. I sat inside the car for several moments afterward, staring through the windshield while rain blurred the courthouse lights into soft gold streaks. All those years protecting secrets, missing holidays, burying grief, watching friends folded into flags, and somehow the thing that nearly destroyed me wasn't war, it was family. 3 weeks later, the judge formally dismissed every claim filed by my father, not partially, completely. The ruling included harsh language regarding fraudulent testimony and intentional deception. Federal investigators continued reviewing the forged record requests connected to the case, though Evelyn warned me those outcomes might remain confidential. Jake disappeared almost immediately after the hearings ended. Rumors said he fled to Florida to avoid debt collectors. My father stayed in Cedar Hollow alone. People in town treated him differently after the trial. Respect built over decades vanished faster than anyone expected. Turns out communities admire proud men only until they publicly destroy their own daughters, especially military daughters. I returned to my mother's house in early spring. The property sat at the edge of town where maple trees lined the road in uneven rows. When I unlocked the front door for the first time since the funeral, the smell hit me instantly. Lavender, old books, coffee grounds, home. Dust floated through golden afternoon sunlight while silence settled gently around me. For several minutes, I simply stood there listening to the quiet. No accusations, no tension, no waiting for someone to criticize the way I breathed. I walked room to room slowly. The kitchen curtains my mother loved still hung beside the sink. Her reading glasses remained folded neatly near the living room lamp. A knitted blanket rested across the couch exactly where she'd left it before the hospital. Grief returned differently this time, softer, less violent, like missing someone instead of drowning in them. Late that evening, while sorting through boxes in the attic, I found a small cedar chest tucked beneath old winter coats. Inside were photographs, birthday cards, and several sealed envelopes with my name written across them in my mother's handwriting. My chest tightened immediately. Hands trembling slightly, I opened the first letter. "Claire, if you're reading this, then I'm probably gone. And knowing your father, things may already be difficult." I had to stop reading for a moment. Outside, rain tapped gently against the attic windows. I continued slowly. "Your father was not always cruel, but somewhere along the way, life turned his disappointments into bitterness. And bitterness is a hungry thing. It consumes everyone nearby. But never mistake his inability to love properly as proof that you were hard to love." Tears blurred the page. I wiped them away quickly and kept reading. "He feared your strength because he spent his whole life doubting his own. I never did." I pressed the letter against my chest and cried harder than I had during the trial, because after months of being called a liar, a fraud, an imposter, my mother's words finally brought me home to myself. That summer, I renovated the house instead of selling it, not completely. I kept the creaking floors she loved, the blue kitchen tiles, the garden out back where she used to grow tomatoes every spring. But I changed enough to make the house mine too. I painted the walls lighter, opened the windows more often, let sunlight reach places grief had darkened for years. With part of my savings, I also started a small scholarship fund for daughters of military families in Virginia. Young women pursuing service academies or ROTC programs. The first award ceremony nearly destroyed me emotionally. Watching those girls stand proudly in pressed uniforms while nervous parents clapped from folding chairs, I realized something important. Cycles end when somebody chooses not to continue them. My father taught me silence. My mother taught me endurance, but I wanted to leave behind something better than survival. Then one October evening, he came to the house. I saw him through the front window before he knocked. Older now, smaller somehow. The confident posture he carried my entire childhood had collapsed inward over the past months. He stood near the porch steps with both hands buried inside his coat pockets while cold wind moved through the trees behind him. I opened the door but stayed inside. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Claire." His voice sounded fragile, almost unfamiliar. "I heard about the scholarship." I waited quietly. He looked past me into the house. "Your mother would have liked it." The words hurt more than anger because for the first time he sounded sincere, but sincerity arrives too late sometimes. "I came to say," he swallowed hard, "I made mistakes." I studied his face carefully. The man standing on my porch was no longer terrifying, just lonely, and that was sadder. "My mother gave me this home," I said softly. "You gave me every reason to survive." His eyes filled slightly. I think he wanted forgiveness. But forgiveness and access are not the same thing. After a long silence, he nodded once and stepped backward off the porch. Then he walked away slowly into the falling leaves. I never saw him again. Sometimes people ask whether winning the case felt satisfying. The truth, justice isn't the same as peace. The courtroom gave me back my name, but walking away from my father, finally walking away without needing his approval, that's what healed me. And if this story touched you in some way, I'd love to hear where you're watching from tonight. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to choose between protecting your peace and protecting your family's image? Stories like this remind us we're not alone. And if you enjoy real stories about strength, betrayal, survival, and second chances, go ahead and subscribe. Stick with us for the next journey. Because sometimes the people who try to erase us end up writing the very proof of who we really are. Take care of yourselves, and remember, your name is yours. No one gets to take it away.